All my life I wanted to be a barra boy. A barra boy I've always wanted to be. I get my living, I stick to it with pride. I'm a coster from over the land beside. I turn my back upon society. Take me where the ripe bananas grow. They're only a dozen a shilling, that's how I get my living. I ought to been a barra boy years ago.
All my life I wanted to be a barra boy. A barra boy I've always wanted to be. I get my living, I stick to it with pride. I'm a coster from over the land beside. I turn my back upon society. Take me where the ripe bananas grow. They're only a dozen a shilling, that's how I get my living. I ought to be a barra boy years ago.
Get off me barrel!
I ought to be a barra boy years ago.
Well, now, the voice of Gerry Gee. And how many people would remember that? A Christmas pantomime. And I've got the actual voice of Gerry Gee sitting right across the desk from me, Ron Blaskett.
How nice to be with you, Alex. And I must ask you, first of all, is this microphone AC or DC?
Well, I think it's AC.
Oh, my voice is DC, darn crook.
Thank you very much, Ron. Do you know, I was going back through the archives and you last visited us in February of 2002.
Good heavens, those archives would be dusty and rotten by now, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, I would think.
And Ron, I would like to just ask you a few questions because I think it's very important that a lot of people, Gerry Gee's now been off our screens for a long time and there's a whole new generation out there that perhaps wouldn't be familiar. Gerry Gee was on Channel 9 and how many years was that?
I did 10 years at Channel 9 and then I went to Perth with Denzel Howson to be in charge of live television over there.
Oh, yes.
And it fulfilled another side of me to be an executive of a television, number 3 in the station, and it was a great experience.
Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it very much, but I still kept performing.
Right. Okay, so where did it all start for you? Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Victoria, but at the age of 7, I was over in Perth because my father was made the Boy Scout organiser for Australia, Brunswick being the number 1 troop, and in the course of his work, having left the National Bank, we were sent to Western Australia. At one Christmas time, we went to a boys' home at Gosnells in Western Australia, and it was their annual fete where they sold craft work, but in the band rotunda, which is one of those round places that brass bands used to play in, you still see them in some of the old gardens,
My word.
there was a ventriloquist called Professor Turner,
Oh, yes.
and as we got there late, his figure, Sailor Jim, was going into a big trunk and I could hear the voice coming distinctly from inside the trunk.
Right.
That went into my brain at 7 years of age and I said to Dad, "What was that?" He said, "That son is a ventriloquist." I said, "Well, how does he do it?" Dad didn't know, but at the age of 13 back here in Parslow Street, Melbourne, I was able to go to a public library and for the sum of nothing, get a book on ventriloquism. And that started me off.
So that was the beginning of it all.
It was a beginning, and there's an interesting footnote to that.
Tell us.
Years later, when I was in Perth, people rang me and said, "Our grandfather, Professor Turner, was a ventriloquist, and we've got his figures under the house. Would you like them?"
Fantastic.
Boy, would I like them. So I acquired those old figures, including the first one I saw, Sailor Jim, and that, thank goodness, is now in the Melbourne Performing Arts Museum under that big spire in St Kilda Road.
Oh, that's wonderful, isn't it? Now, you're saying your dad was in the bank, National Bank?
Colonial Bank in those days. He
days.
was secretary to the founder, Selby Paxton.
Right.
But one of the Arnott's Biscuit family persuaded him to leave that and go into young people's work. which was the Boy Scout
Boy
movement.
Scouts, and he was instrumental in a lot of that early
Instrumental and a wonderful organiser of the scout camps and that sort of thing. A man of charm and great radiation of personality. And my father was one of those men who you felt awed in his presence. He was such a good communicator. In fact, he might even have been used by 95.7.
And he encouraged you to
encouraged me. He was a little probably worried about places like the Tivoli and things like that.
Right.
The Tivoli was considered almost a sinful place in those days,
So
in those
I
early
believe,
days,
yes.
and yet compared with that famous English cook who's on nowadays, I would say it was pretty mild. And the works of Moe and George Wallace and those people was very, very mild compared to what you'd get from Gordon Ramsay.
Doing a bit of research, you spent about 20 years in club work before going into TV.
Club work and radio.
And radio.
And
Tell
winning
us a bit
talent
about,
quests.
a bit the radio. That fascinates me.
Radio was great. I won a thing called Australia's Amateur Hour, which was broadcast from the Princess Theatre, and it was compared originally by Harry Dirth, then Dick Fair, and then Terry Deer, Bruce Mansfield's uncle, who you hear on another station every night.
Yes.
And it was a wonderful show because they packed the Princess Theatre, so you had the advantage of the reaction of a live audience, and you waited 1 week for the votes to come in because they didn't have the electronic devices of now.
Yes.
And after 1 week, I found that I'd won Australia's Amateur Hour. That led way to lots of work and a weekly spot on Norman Banks's Victory Varieties on a Friday night. And thanks to Doug Elliott, who was a very smart young man about town in those days, I was able to get onto all sorts of things without going through the audition process.
Did you have a favourite person to work with in radio? Was there anyone that stands out as a mentor or?
Yes, I think Doug Elliott was extremely
man,
good.
yeah.
I can't say that Norm Banks was good to work with. I was a young kid just coming in, extremely nervous, of course, about a big show like Victory Varieties. But the person who made it bearable for me was that wonderful lady Margot Sheridan, the pianist.
Yes.
And thank heavens I was able to bring her into the Tarak show and use her there.
Yes, I remember those days. She was a lovely lady. Absolutely
A beautiful lady, and you know, she did her work so well in helping people make their performance better at Channel 9, but they sacked her by the telephone. No boardroom drink of coffee or anything like that, and that was a terrible thing. But I was able to use Margot in freelance work. Thank goodness.
You were, my understanding is, my research is right, you were going to actually be on the one of the children's shows with Nicky, wasn't it? Nicky coming
Well, he was to be the one that I worked with.
Yes.
And very inconsiderately, he died before we opened.
in 1956.
Yes, and we were
September.
frantic as to know who to get. I was already booked by Norm Spencer,
Right.
who was program manager at 3DB, having done closed-circuit demonstrations of television.
That's an
I was
interesting
booked
thing.
for the kids' show, and when he asked me, I said yes, because I'd worked with Nicky and knew I'd be okay with him. And I said, how many nights? He said, 5 nights, 1 hour. Well, after I picked myself up from the floor, I thought that of the material that I would have to have.
And live to air.
And live to air, and it was a tremendous thing to sort of get your mind around, because really you did a standard act apart from radio every night that you appeared.
Yes.
But anyway, I got ready for it, and I spent a lot of time in research and developing a personality that would be accepted as a live personality on television, not just a comic character.
Right.
I knew that you couldn't stand up and do a ventriloquial act. You would have to have Gerry Gee accepted as contrite, humorous, all the different facets of children in those days,
Yes.
and still make it appealing for kids from 3 to 33.
Indeed, you would. You would. So with Nicky passing away in September of 56, was that when they brought Happy in?
We had to find somebody quickly,
Yeah.
and we found Happy Hammond, who I think was doing Geelong radio at that time.
He'd been on 3GL, and I
Yeah.
thought he'd made the move up to UZ doing some sort of a kids show on radio.
Well, he was working with Graham Kennedy.
That's right, he was.
Yes,
Yes.
and successfully. And he proved a winner because he had that ability to direct contact with the viewer instead of his eyes darting all over the place like yours and mine is now.
I can still see him now with that hat looking down the camera.
Yes,
And that was the thing about him.
exactly.
But everyone only remembers him for... They only remember him for clicking fingers.
That's a strange thing, you know. Certainly he clicked the fingers on opening night, and he clicked the fingers in a pantomime. But years later on radio, one of the current announcers, when somebody mentioned about the children's show and how good they were and the production that went into them, he said, "Oh yes, fellows in funny hats clicking their fingers."
Yeah.
It was very unfair. Happy Hammond was much more than a finger clicker, and he only did it once a year in the pantomime.
Exactly. And I remember I'd come home from school and I wanted to watch the show.
Well, it had a lot of facets, didn't it?
Yeah.
And we put tremendous amount of work. And in fact, Sir Arthur Warner was the major owner of the station at that time. He was making a lot of money selling 17-inch black and white television sets, and so he was able to put money into what I might call indigenous live television in those days.
Yes, that's wonderful. Gerry Gee, Chicago made?
Yes, he was made by a wonderful figure maker called Frank Marshall, who years before had made Edgar Bergen's Charlie McCarthy.
Right.
Edgar Bergen being the father of Candice Bergen, who you saw in Murphy Brown and you still see in major films.
Yes, indeed.
And
good singer too.
Yes. And Edgar Bergen became very famous on radio, the Chase and Sanborn Hour. And you might recall when Orson Welles did War of the Worlds as a documentary, as though it was really happening.
Yes.
And he panicked America.
He did.
Except in 2 states. And they were the 2 states where Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy were big. So they didn't do an exit from their homes when War of the Worlds was happening.
I love
But
it.
his figure, Charlie McCarthy, was made by the same maker, Frank Marshall, as Gerry Gee, but years before.
That's right. Now, Gerry had Adolphus Twerk, was it?
Adolphus Twerk I'd had all my life
Had
since
you?
I was a
Had
young
you?
man, with another figure called Willie Ross.
Willie Ross.
Adolphus Twerk was a humanised version of Disney's Goofy Dog with the buck teeth and
Yes.
the
Yo.
good day. Is that cock right up there? Yeah, it's right up there. And Adolphus Twerk was a humanised version of that wonderful character,
How wonderful.
Goofy Dog.
That's great. I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't know that you'd had Adolphus before Gerry.
Oh, yes. Adolphus Twerk was way back till I was 14 years of age, carved by a Melbourne engraver, and a wonderful job.
Ah, he did a great job.
Yes, wonderful.
Where's he now? I know that Gerry was... Now, he was sold, wasn't he? Gerry.
Yes, the original Gerry Gee was sold at Joel's Auctions because my son had a builder who went broke and he was left in dire straits with a framework rotting and he needed money, so I was able to help him with the sale of the doll.
How wonderful.
And a gentleman who's got a business in St Kilda Road paid $18,700 for him, so I was able to help the family a lot
That's
with that
wonderful.
sale. But there is a reproduction kicking around.
Is there?
I say reproduction, it might be a distant son or something like that. I'm not sure.
Ron, when did you last do your work with Gerry? Was it at a school? I seem to recall there was a school involved.
We did do a television show at a school
Yeah.
for one of the Hunter family's progeny, but that was not really the last show. The last show, after 12 years of voluntary work, was at the Knox Club last November.
Oh, right.
And that was a wonderful show, and it was packed out, and we got a lot of press through it, both Herald Sun, Melbourne Observer, which is a great show business paper, and things like that. So we went out with quite a bang at that time.
That's very good. Now, you have another son who's in...
Yes.
That's the same sort of work, doesn't it?
My second son is a ventriloquist and a very competent one in today's very tough corporate market, and he's able to assess an audience very well and do cutting-edge entertainment. At the moment, there hasn't been a lot of corporate work. The footy club functions have been in the background. There hasn't been as many smoke nights as I used to call them. And but he does quite a lot of corporate work managed by my elder son, Ronald. His name is Peter, but he is an optician and he runs the spectacle side up at Baronia.
For some young person who has perhaps an idea of getting in to vent work, what's their first move? Is it? I mean, they don't have these days the ability to work in to study, to train, or the stage, the TIV, and all those. Is it a worthwhile thing to do you think?
Oh, very much so. You find a niche, but the way to learn is to go to the library and get lots of books. Mm-hmm. The first thing you've got to do is develop another voice to suit whatever personality you're going to work with.
Right.
It can be a soft puppet. It can be a ready-made ventriloquist doll, which are very expensive, and the only really professional maker is a young fellow called Solberg in California. Right. He makes a very good figure. But soft puppets can be very good, and you can often adapt some of these soft puppets in toy shops by stitching them out so that you can get your hand in the head, but the voice must suit that character.
Right.
And the way to do this is to get in the front of a mirror, particularly if it's a dressing table with the side pieces,
yes.
Go through the alphabet, saying each letter and repeating each letter in a different voice, even if it's a falsetto voice. A, B, B, but the second letter, don't move your lips. That sounds easy, but when you get to bottle of beer, it can be very difficult. Don't let it become bottle of gear, and your books will tell you how to do that.
Yes. Well, look, unfortunately, I mean, costs now, there's not a lot of variety on television. There's not a lot of stage shows that young people can get. Well, I guess they were called sight acts, were they not? When people would have something different other than just getting up and singing.
That's right. And when I started to work two figures at the same time, my appeal skyrocketed in Melbourne pre-war, and I was very fortunate that after initial training, I was seconded to Army Entertainment. Our headquarters were the old film studios at Pagewood in Sydney, and our chief was Colonel Jim Davidson, who'd been the ABC dance band leader.
Yes, indeed.
And we had luminaries like Peter Finch, Grant Taylor, Horry Dargy, the world-class harmonica player. There were 450 of us in different groups. In my group, which was produced by Max Reddy initially, Smokey Dawson, the great singer, was part of it. Yes. Later on, I became best man at his wedding. But after 2 years with Max Reddy and part of the ABC orchestra that were of military age, I got given my own show, and we supported Gracie Fields on a South Pacific tour.
Yes.
And I finished the war in Borneo. And what a great person Gracie Fields was. After every show, she would come down and say, "Thank you for your help tonight." I worked with another luminary of television in Sydney for 3 weeks with a singer called Judy Stone, and he didn't speak to any of the cast for the whole 3 weeks even to say hello. What a difference to a world star like Gracie Fields.
Exactly. One of the questions I had here to ask you was when you were working with so many people throughout your career, long career, who was the one that shone through as being very nice and approachable? I suppose Gracie.
Gracie Fields certainly was. There were some lovely people in radio. In latter days, John Vertigan, I found him a wonderful fellow with a great voice.
John's a nice man. He does some work for us here.
Great. Oh, I'm so pleased. He's back in Australia.
He's back in Australia.
Last I heard, he phoned me he was going to America.
He was.
But I'm so glad that he's back. And I understand he lives down the coast, Rosebud Way or something.
He lives down there, yes.
Well, if John Vertigan is listening, I owe him a lot because I think his voice was one that you aspired to have for radio.
Still got a great voice. He's done some very good work for us here at Golden Days.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so it's great that you brought that up. Now, you've got a book out, and I want to get onto that because this is very important. Tell us a little bit about the book, Ron.
Well, I decided that the first 2 years of television, particularly with Channel 9, were practically unknown. Nothing had been written about it. And if you ask people nowadays who was the first person on Victorian television, they will eventually name Bruce Gingell, who was Sydney, and we didn't see him here, but he received a lot of publicity through being the first.
That old kinescope.
That's right. They forget that the first person was, and may I ask you, who was it?
Would that be Was it Eric Pearce? No.
No, he was at Channel 7. The first person on GTV9 was from Mount Dandenong, and it was the great Jeff Cork.
Oh, right.
And 4
Jeff
years later,
Cork.
I was able to make Corky King of the Kids.
That's right.
When Graham Kennedy had finished with him as a foil for In Melbourne Tonight.
Was Corky still working at 3DB at that stage?
No, he came over completely to Channel 9.
Oh, good.
A wonderful fellow to work with. And I might mention that as Corky King of the Kids, which was my idea for him, he was the best, so far as ratings are concerned, of the children's show compares.
He was great, wasn't
There
he?
was magic about it, a
King
big fellow
Corky,
and Corky
King
King
of
of
the
the
Kids.
Kids. But mind you, when he went in for a beer at the local corner at night, he probably got razzed a bit.
He probably
and
did.
felt a little embarrassed by the role.
His wife,
Well, at that time was Val
Val
Ruff,
Ruff, yes.
but later on the matron of the Masonic Hospital. Val Ruff had been married before to a man called Jack O'Leary, who was a singer in
he was
Melbourne.
a singer, wasn't he?
And he became a stand-up comic and very successful around the Sydney clubs.
Wow. All right, back to the book now.
Yes, the book, well, we took 7 years writing it because we felt we had to cover those early days, and I've done that, and I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of photos and clippings from those days. Those I didn't have, we went into the Performing Arts Museum where my huge scrapbook is, and we scanned and got clippings and photos of those early days.
Right.
And I go back right before that to the start of my career.
Wonderful.
And 7 years' work. We've produced this book called You, Me and Gerry Gee, and it has been most successful. And a gentleman who ran a television company for outside broadcasts, sold it and is now retired, called Berriman, Richard Berriman and his
yes.
wife Mary. They approached me and put up very kindly the money for that book. It's printed on beautiful paper.
It is.
Wonderfully coloured inserts and really a great book. So the 7 years' work was something that we can be proud of. We found that bookstores that are going broke everywhere were not good. You'd put them in there, have to pay for them to go in, pay for them to come out. They were put on consignment, so you waited 6 months to get any money. So we've only sold them directly at shows I was at in the last 12 years. And they're only obtainable now by ringing my son Ronald on 9842 5450. Now, a lot of people won't remember that. So I suggest, and it doesn't occur to them, to look in the phone book and see the name Blaskett Ron at Doncaster East, and they can get the book, $20 for the paperback, $40 for the hardcover limited edition, $10 postage and packaging, and there won't be any reprints, and both the paperback and the hardcover have become collector's items, fetching up to $220 at auctions for Rotary and that sort of thing.
Well, that's fantastic. Just repeat that number again, Ron.
9842
Yes.
5458 Ron Blaskett Jr. I might mention too that Bob Phillips, the producer at Channel 9, put out a wonderful DVD with the same name, and that's a really good job. That's $20 plus $5 packaging and postage.
Well, they could get the deal.
Exactly.
Book and a video.
That's right, yes.
And it'd be, I've seen the video, there's a little bit of kinnies of Gerry working.
Yeah, Gerry working, the pantomimes, the song of which you played from one of them at the opening there, Barrow Boy.
And we're gonna close off with another one. Now, the girl next door was Elaine McKenna, wasn't it?
That's right, and we lost her to America, and when she came back, she did it again, but when she eventually married Tim, and had two lovely daughters, we bought Patty McGrath in, who became Patty Newton.
Patty Newton. Oh,
Patty Newton. And what a wonderful asset she was.
Isn't she?
Patty Newton, as she is now, gave a lot to GTV9, and her part of television was really wonderful. And people like Susan Gay Anderson, they contribute a hell of a lot to the establishment of GTV9
Some wonderful
as the
names.
major television
Wonderful
station.
names. It was at that time. Unfortunately, times have changed and we move on.
Yes.
But Ron, I want to so much thank you for coming into the station. It's been an absolute delight after all these years to catch up again and find out what you're doing, and you're happily retired now
Yes,
and enjoying life.
very much so.
And we're going to close up with Gerry singing with Patty McGrath, and it's Dreamings for You and Me. And this is from the Kids Pantomime Tour,
Kids
isn't it?
Pantomime, written and produced by the great late Denzel Housen.
Thank you so much, Ron Blaskett. Here it is.
Just dream a while, for dreaming is for you. In a dream you'll find each mile shorter and troubles are few. When the plans that you've made go astray and the clouds come drifting too, and the skies grow darker each day, you wonder what's happening to you. Just dream a while, for dreaming is for you. In a dream you'll find each mile shorter and troubles are few, for a dream is the wish of your heart, in your mind as clear as can be. In your dreams your cares will depart, so dreaming's for you and me. When your smile disappears in a frown, and the world seems grey and blue, and your cares have gotten you down, here is what we say to you.
Just dream a while, for dreaming is for you. In a dream you'll find each smile shorter and troubles are few, for a dream is the wish of your heart.
In your mind as clear as can be,
In your dreams your cares will be